We've got lots of people who want to speak about the data breach from the Labour Party. The first that I'd like to bring in is Damien Stone, who has had an on-running dispute with the Labour Party, and he's relishing the opportunity to take some legal action here. And I think that's kind of what's going on with a lot of people. Damien, are you there?
I am indeed. Can you hear me?
I can. Thank you for coming on. So can you tell us what do you think about the Labour Party's treatment of you as a member in the past, and why would you like to take this case on against the Labour Party?
Well, a few people know about my case. I mean, I was targeted by trolls who are mentioned in the leaked Labour report, and luckily I accidentally found out who the person was who tried to smear me, and it's somebody who was accused in the leaked Labour report of making spurious complaints. So basically, when I found out who it was, I looked into that person's background, and it was known by the party that he was a serial smearer. He tried to get people chucked out of the party for being rude to Donald Trump. It was so bizarre. And then this person found anti-Semitism as the most useful weapon. And that's what it says in the leaked Labour report. So basically, I then put in a counter complaint, having cleared myself, because he made such an idiot of himself when he tried to smear me. And the Labour Party have refused to deal with my complaint against him, despite all the evidence, for 3 years now. I tried to do a subject access request, and of course the Labour Party refused to do anything about it. And I went to the Information Commissioner about that data breach, and I had 2 complaints upheld, but it still has not been enough for them to think that they have to deal with my case. So the way I look at it, if I could afford to take them to court, you know, then I would do, but other people have lost, and I'm not prepared to, you know, put my livelihood at risk. But it seems to me that this data breach, it could be a class action, and I look at it like Al Capone, that they kind of got him on tax evasion. As it is, the Labour Party deserves to be, I mean, people should be going to prison for the sort of smearing that went on. People lost their jobs because of this vicious smearing of people. And you know, I'm disappointed that the police haven't investigated. I'm disappointed in a way that the party hasn't already gone bankrupt. I'm disappointed that the press haven't gone with this case, even though they've got the leaked Labour report as smoking gun evidence. So if it's the tax evasion, if it's the data breach thing that holds these people to account, then good. And if that means them going bankrupt, then fine. And I'll just add one other thing. The person who trolled me is on video with his lawyer, who he's a very famous lawyer who put an end to the news of the world. And they were laughing and joking in this video that ultimately their goal was to bankrupt the Labour Party. And this is part of my evidence to the EHRC and to the Ford inquiry, which basically says, you know, these people you're allowing to troll other members and to deliver names to you, they actually are trying to bankrupt the Labour Party. And of course, the Labour Party is so inept, they don't see this, that I'm the enemy and these people are their friends. And yet their goal is to bankrupt the party. Because of what the Labour Party did to me, I was the chair of my CLP, I was the chair of our campaign forum, I was everybody's election agent in the general elections down here. And what thanks do I get? Nothing. They want to expel me for being a member of Labour Against the Witch Hunt. It's utterly disgusting what they've done. And I wish the police were involved. If it has to be a data breach thing that, you know, holds them to account, then let it happen.
Great. Well, thank you. The thing is, I'm interested in hearing the anger and people's wish to push this issue, because it's almost like you say, it's the Achilles heel. It's a bit like Al Capone and the taxes. Jeanette Fletcher, you wrote in about your case. Are you able to talk about that now?
Yeah, I can do. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of similarities between what happened to me and what happened to Damien. And I think we've had exchanges on social media, Damien and I, in the past about this. Basically, I was targeted by the CLP secretary. I was CLP secretary because in 2017, we ran a campaign. We had an imposed NEC candidate, which wasn't ideal, but we were 2 weeks into the general election. campaign. So we had to run with what we had. And despite the campaign committee not helping, in fact, hindering and sabotaging our campaign, we actually managed to get a Labour MP in a Tory marginal. We were the 17th Tory marginal at the time, and we had to win if Labour was to form a government. So we went for it. After that, I was targeted. My husband, who was the agent and the CLP chair, he was targeted as well. But they really, I don't know why they went for me, but they did. But what happened, I was having a period of depression at the time, was on medication, and I couldn't stand it any longer. So I just withdrew, resigned from the Labour Party. And then I was asked to, by members and by the MP as well, to rejoin. And I tried to rejoin, but the same people that had campaigned against us and targeted me refused to even let it go to the GLC committee, the executive committee. So, it was all done on the quiet, all kept away from members until I let it out. I let it be known. And then it really got nasty. And I was advised to get a SAR. So I tried to get a SAR. That was December 2017.
Can you tell us what a SAR is?
A subject access request.
Right, okay.
Part of the, at that time in 2017, it was the it was the Data Protection Act. That was subsequently updated in 2018 with the General Data Protection Requirements, which it's slightly stronger than the DPA. Anyway, I applied for the SAR, paid me money, and I waited. It should have been here in 40 days. I eventually got the SAR in September 2019. What it showed was that there was collusion between the secretary of the CLP, the regional office, and the GLU. I mean, I've got emails that you wouldn't believe. All the things that have come out in the Labour leaked reports, I've got similar things that sort of say, yep, that happened to me. Withholding information was common. I mean,
so they wouldn't give you information at all, but they're sharing your information with a third party. So, I mean, are you going to take up this? Are you going to do group action? What do you see as the future for you on this?
I'm not sure where this is going. You see, I contacted the ICO. I was onto them by the minute almost during this period. And I've got 4 different letters from the ICO, each one saying the Labour Party, you are wrong, you must supply this information. What the Labour Party didn't know at this point was I have friends in the CLP who were giving me information that was being passed around. So I knew that the information that they were giving me, in the SAR was incomplete. I know that there's been things missed out. I have the information. But the way the Labour Party have their GDPR requirements set up, the accountability for retaining information, people don't know this. And I found this out by accident from the ICO. But if you apply to the National Party for a SAR, you will only get the information that they're holding at the national level and the regional office level. To get a full picture of what's happened and happening, and this is what I found, you also have to apply to the data controller. Each CLP should have an appointed data controller. Most don't, so the responsibility, whether they know it or not, falls to the CLP secretary. They are responsible and accountable for all the information held at the branch level and at the CLP level. And it was the CLP level, when I applied to the CLP secretary and said, I want this information, loads of trouble trying to get it because they obviously didn't want me to have it. But that was the bit that really showed how the CLP were involved with what they'd done to me. Right.
Okay. Well, look, I've got to move on. But thank you for coming on, Jeanette. I'm going to bring on Greg Hadfield from Brighton and Hove. I'm not sure which. They're quite. Greg?
Hi. Good morning.
Hi, Greg.
From Brighton, actually.
From Brighton, right? Yeah, I know this. It's different. If I say Brighton and you're Hove, that people get angry. So what?
I'm not in Peter Carl's constituency. That was good.
What's your situation on this? And are you planning to take an action against the party for the data breach?
I think this data breach could be absolutely devastating for the Labour Party bureaucracy. And I'm not just speaking in terms of the financial damage. You know, we've seen reports of what, up to 15 million or 8 million or whatever. And these are laid out in the ICO and the GDPR regulations, which are complex. But I think it's far more serious than the monetary damage. I think your analogy with Al Capone was appropriate. I think what we've got is we've got a bureaucracy that is a criminal conspiracy against the members and has been for many a year. I go back to Ian McNicol as the beginning of this, but David Evans is taking it to a new level, and it's on several fronts. And I think if we handle this correctly, in the way that, to be honest, people in the left haven't handled the last 4 or 5 years correctly, then this could be absolutely devastating. I'll just go through a few reasons. One, we don't know enough about the data breach, but I was one of the victims of the previous data breach, if you remember it, in the summer of 2020. And that's when data was leaked by those of us who've made donations to the Labour Party of less than £7,500. And I got my email from David Evans saying I was one of the victims. But I was assured that no passwords, bank account information or usernames were breached, because Blackboard, the third-party software supplier who run Razor's Edge, the fundraising software that many of us have used, and other pieces of software, had assured them thus. It turned out not to be true. Usernames, passwords, bank account details were breached by the hackers. Blackboard paid them off. And there's a huge class action going on in the States about saying whether Blackboard, the huge global software company, is liable, or whether all its customers around the world, including universities, charities, not-for-profits, and by some accident, the Labour Party as well, for Razor's Edge. Never got a reply when I asked the Labour Party to keep me in touch about it. Obviously not. They didn't take it that seriously. What's interesting about this one is it's a third-party software partner, but it's not been named and it's not come out in any other way. Blackboard had to tell the American authorities, it's based in Charleston, South Carolina, and the Labour Party had to announce it because everyone else was, Universities National Trust. No other organisation has announced this yet, so it makes me wonder who that third party is. There's been speculation, and this is only speculation, but my best guess, who would have substantial elements of the database? And given that it's expelled members, as well as long expelled members, I was expelled before this breach, and I still get emails from Southeast Regional Labour Party. I still get emails begging me to take part in phone banks. I still get emails to do A, B, and C, even though I was expelled on the same day as Ken Loach. What would be really worrying would be, for instance, speculation. If, say, it was the data held by a non-voter, anonyvoter.com, the software that's used in most CLP and elections involving Labour Party members. You know anonyvoter.com, yeah? Right. Based in Croydon by a friend of David Evans, Henson IT Solutions, yeah? Now there's another hair running, yeah? We will find out because the ICO are investigating. And the person holding our data, we will find out. So what should happen? Well, first of all, the Labour Party has been played fast and loose with our data for more than 5 years. I submitted my first subject access request in the summer of 2016. They've consistently and chronically failed to live up to their duties for good reason, because the data they collect on us is gobsmacking. when you get your SAR, if you get it, and sometimes it's taken more than 2 years for me to get it, the ICO have been involved. They've found the Labour Party guilty. Every reply, here's the latest, says that they are working with the Labour Party to improve their processes, and that I have a right to take action under various clauses under the GDPR, Article 79 or Article 82. But what's worrying about this is, as we know from the leaked report, they are getting increasingly clever about data. There's still a dysfunctional bureaucracy where you always believe cock up rather than conspiracy. But actually, it's somewhere in between. For instance, they use voter ID to match against applications to the party to see if on a wet Wednesday 2 years ago, you said, well, I quite like Caroline Lucas. And then 2 years later, you apply to join the Labour Party. They match that data, and that informs a decision on whether you're accepted or not. I have evidence of this, of agents of the Labour Party. A branch secretary in Hanover and Elm Grove, thankfully has left the party, said to Tom Watson in a public meeting, I have the names of 60 people who expressed support for the Green Party sometime and have now applied to join Hanover and Elm Grove in Brighton Pavilion. Yeah.
Right.
So they're illegally data matching. But what the leaked report showed is they have the tools to trawl our social media with keywords. It started off with a dozen or 15, yeah, or 20. It rapidly got to 1,600. If you're lucky enough to get a subject access request, not within the month that the law lays down, they always ask for the 2-month extension, 3 months. If you're lucky enough and you end up, as I do, with hundreds of pages of massively redacted emails that still sometimes are unredacted because they're a bit incompetent, you know that what they're building behind the scenes, and just think about the nightmare. Just think if Keir Starmer was as bright as Mark Zuckerberg, which he isn't, obviously, but if he bought in resource to do to us and to the voters what Mark Zuckerberg does to us and Zoom does to us, you know, a lot of shit goes on about our data that we don't know about. But in the Labour Party, what it's being used for is to target left-wingers, socialists, to expel them, suspend them, to monitor them, to see if they're fit to stand for public office. I was blacklisted I was the only parliamentary applicant to be a parliamentary candidate in Brighton Pavilion, from Brighton Pavilion. 3 people applied, 1 of them pulled out, my CV wasn't put forward, and a friend of mine got the gig, yeah? I only found that out with a subject access request. But here's the future of the Labour Party. It's a centralised party that uses data as a weapon. It hasn't got the facility within its organisation to do that. And I go back to the beginning of Contact Creator and 2004, 2005, and they give it to people who aren't up to the job. Then they pay companies like Blackboard, who are allegedly up to the job, and it costs a fortune, or they bring in outfits like Henson IT from Croydon doing a non-e-voter. Anyone who's used a non-e-voter, if you look at their privacy conditions, you have shared your data with David Evans's friend from Croydon, and it makes you wonder what happens to it, because the cock-up element means that your data is being breached. So what can be done? The ICO, who obviously have an interesting relationship with David Evans and the Labour Party and the Ford report, because they're used as the fig leaf for the non-publication of the Ford report. The Ford report has to be published because within that it should address the data issues. They have a subject access request tool that can easily deal with subject access requests. In 2016, 2017, they used to get 30 a year. In 2017, they got 200 and something. I hope that they get 300,000 in this year. It is down to everyone. Everyone. Tony Blair said the Freedom of Information Act was the biggest mistake he ever made. Too bloody right. Let's prove he was right. Let's use freedom of information to bring down this corrupt conspiracy against members, against socialists, that sees people like me, Graham Bass, Ken Loach, and lots of other people expelled, and yet still, perfectly lawfully actually, they hang on to our data. It is, right. There's a French insurance company that's just been fined millions because of over retention. You can keep the data, but you have to justify it. We have to apply to subject access requests. We have to find decent lawyers, not no win, no fee spivs, of which there are. Databreach.com, look at it, you know, no win, no fee. Find some lawyers who know their way around, not for financial crippling of the Labour Party, but for absolute, I mean, I think it could financially cripple them, but to show that they are playing fast and loose illegally against, with our data, as part of, only part, a criminal conspiracy against the members that will get worse as they become a centralized, data-driven, email, social media type operation.
Okay, well, look
at this, and the leaked report gives the clues. Read the leaked report with a view to this. Yeah.
Thank you, Greg. It was meant to be 3 minutes, but people kept saying let him.
3 minutes.
People kept saying let him talk. So I listened to the opinions of everyone else.
Thank you,
now,
Chris.
Pamela. People have been given a list of who's to speak, and it's all gone a bit awry now. But I'm going to persevere, and Pamela Fitzpatrick has to go off soon. I wanted to hear her view on this because she's got a legal background. Pamela.
Thanks, Crispin. I agree with Greg. It needs to be done properly, and I'm a little worried by kind of lots of the things that I'm hearing. First of all, there's no kind of class actions in the UK in the way that there are in America. It's possible if lots of people make claims for the same thing, for something, I think it's a group litigation order, but that's around the case management of something. We don't have the same system as the UK, as the USA. But also there's loads of people have been sending me details of lawyer this, lawyer that, you know, no win, no fee. This is the same as the types of companies that advertise on daytime TV to get people who've had a personal injury to make a claim. And often it's the lawyers, those lawyers who come out with more of your claim than anybody else. So absolutely have a think about what you want to do, but don't rush into this and just go off with one of those lawyers who are promising the earth and probably delivering very little. So I think we need to take time, and maybe, Crispin, you could get somebody on the show who's an expert in this, because I'm not an expert in data breach and enforcing it through litigation. But as other people have pointed out, it's always really expensive, and it shouldn't be the first recourse. You've got the ICO, you can go to the ICO if you're not happy and see what happens there. But I just think it is very serious. What worries me is because I have responsibility for data in my job, and if there's a data breach of even one person, I take it really seriously, and you have to assess the risk, what the risk is to the individual whose data has been lost, and then if it's sufficiently serious, report it to the ICO. And that doesn't seem to be taken that seriously by the Labour Party. I've written and asked for details of who the third party is. I've not had a response. I would expect to be told that as somebody affected. If I was responsible for a data breach of a client, I would have to tell them exactly what that breach was, and so that they could mitigate any kind of loss or damage to their reputation themselves. But we're not in a position to do that. And so, again, I don't expect to get a very prompt response from the Labour Party. But what also concerns me, again, if I'd been responsible for such a serious data breach, I would not then be concentrating on expelling members like Graham Bash for using retrospective legislation. But that's still what happened on Friday. So we've got serious problems in the Labour Party. you know, despite the number of lawyers in it, they don't seem to have a clue about the law or fair processes or what their duties and responsibilities are. So we need to know who are the third party. Don't rush into anything, particularly with these law firms that are kind of promising the earth and no win, no fee. Absolutely agree with Greg. The problem is finding decent lawyers who understand the issue, but also understand the Labour Party and how it's operating. And so what I would say is you never rush to litigation, hold back, wait and see. We need to find out who's the third party, go through the complaints process in terms of to the Information Commissioner if the Labour Party is not responding, and take it from there. Okay, so that would be my advice. I'm horrified once again, and there are reports today that it may be a company linked to David Evans. We'll see.
So I'm just going to move on to Steve Walker, who's agreed to come on, and he's got lots of news about what's happening from Squawkbox, and he's got to go in a minute. So Steve, can you speak now?
Yes, I mean, I'll have to be very brief because I was expecting it a bit earlier, so I'm going to have to go very shortly. But I mean, there's a couple of things not related to this, just from earlier on as well with the paper review. I mean, it was interesting. Chris Bryant was decrying the Tories retrospectively changing the rules to save Owen Paterson this week, which is quite interesting when he's part of the right wing that's doing exactly that to attack Labour members. And it's probably more like 200,000 people have left by now, which gives you some idea of the scale of this this whole thing with the data breach. Because I mean, there are, you know, in theory, if the decided that Labour's at fault in this whole breach, they can face a fine of up to 17.5 million pounds, or 4% of their, which is in their case would be 17.5 million. But Keir Starmer and David Evans would face personal liability for that if the party is unable to pay. Sadly, so would the National Executive Committee, including some of the good lefties who are on there. But it, you know, it could be quite serious for them. The concern really is the fact that they tended to almost always play softball with the Labour Party. They've essentially had a free pass for more than a year now not to respond to subject access requests anywhere near, if at all, within the time that's prescribed by the law. So if the Information Commissioner is prepared to turn a blind eye to that kind of thing, well, you have mixed views as to whether he's going to properly pursue this issue with the party. But some of the aggravating factors in the way that they've behaved on this is the fact that, one, it's ex-members on a huge scale that have been affected, possibly more than current members of the party. And the party has no real excuse for retaining their data. Certainly, you know, I suppose they could make an argument in disciplinary cases that they need to keep it in case somebody tries to get back in. But most people
just ask you a couple of questions. This idea that they can keep data, it's written on one of their pages about the conditions in which they have to abide by, why they're keeping data. And some of those people that I've responded to the survey have had none of those conditions apply to them. And this other issue of people asking for a subject access request and they're being asked to send in photo ID. Have you heard about this as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's an old thing. That's not new. I had to provide photo ID when I put one in last year, so it's not a recent requirement, that one. The real aggravating factor, I think, on this is the fact that there have been numerous instances of people showing when they've left the party, saying, I don't want you keeping my data. Will you confirm to me that my data has been eradicated from your systems in accordance with the GDPR? And the party's written back and said, yes, that erasure request has been actioned, it's now been done. And yet now we're finding in a new data breach that's only recent that those people have still been affected, and the party's still got their details on record to be able to email them to tell them that they've been affected by this data breach. So the party's been lying to data subjects about getting rid of their data, even when specifically asked about it. Now, if that doesn't get them in line for a maximum fine, I don't know what does, because, you know, if you look at some of the penalties, I mean, it's not clear why Amazon got a £636 million fine yet. But Google got one simple, you know, not fully obtaining people's permission to use their, you know, their data in the way that it was showing them ads. So actually losing somebody's data to a criminal enterprise by outsourcing it to a third party, probably without due diligence, is is pretty massive. And the other thing, and that I think Greg referred to it, there are lots of people spreading rumours that it's Evans linked companies that has lost this data. It's possible, but I haven't seen anything yet to indicate that it is. However, if it is, then there are serious issues with that, because a non-invited contract, for example, was awarded, as far as can be told, and the company has declined to deny this, without any competitive process. They just put a bid in, and the party went, "Yep, that'll do." Gave them the award, and these are mates of David Evans. David Evans's wife has been, is running now the company. Somehow this solves the conflict of interest of him being general secretary, that it's not him running the campaign company anymore, it's his wife running it. I can't see why they would have that amount of data for what they do, but they've been awarded contracts as well. And again, there's been no transparency about the awarding process on that. We've already heard about.
Yeah, one other thing, I noticed there's a firm in Liverpool, Emerald Law. They seem to be taking up cases. Are you aware of any other firms, or is there a particular way people
I mean, I've heard of them,
for?
not in connection to this, and I suspect that they're in that kind of mass cheap, not necessarily expert. I'm not, I don't know the firm intimately, so it might not be true, but I think it needs to, whoever handles this in the end, it needs to be somebody who is an expert in that particular field. And whether they are they just seen an opportunity, I'm not sure. The other aspect, again, that should exacerbate what they've been doing is that it's entirely unlawful to do it, scraping people's social media. But we know for a fact that through the Nation Builder system, and probably through other systems that they're using, they've been actively scraping people's social media for years now. The right-wing staff within the party. It's not legal for them to do that. If the Information Commissioner does his or her job, then they should be getting the book thrown at them on this. And the last aspect I'll touch on just before I have to go is the fact that all of this stuff, they could end up with a massive lawsuit against them, as well as a potential huge fine from the Information Commissioner. Not so much on the basis of the data being leaked, although that's definitely there's definitely a case there, but on the fact that in pursuing all of this, their whole kind of modus operandi for getting rid of members that they don't like has been entirely illegal. And if this all comes out now as a result of this data breach, then they could face massive personal lawsuits, apart from anything else, for misusing people's data in a way to pursue them. Quite apart from the fact that it's leaked out, it could just be that the leak is the breach is the pebble that kind of falls out of the dam and causes the whole thing to collapse. And I don't blame people for wanting that to happen. I mean, I'd much rather see them all banged up or dragged off and disgraced, and then we get the party back to do something good with. But whichever way it goes, something needs to happen, because at the moment they've been acting with impunity, and this could be the thing that trips them up.
Well, thank you for coming on. I just want to say, everyone, please follow Squawk Box, because Steve's putting up news stories about this all the time. So it'd be worth following them on Twitter and Facebook. Thanks, Steve, for coming on.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
And I know people got their hand up, and there's other people who'd like to speak, but I just wanted to get another legal perspective on this. And Duncan Shipley Dalton's here. It's his birthday as well today, and he's agreed to come on even though it's his birthday. Duncan, are you there? Whoops, I've muted you by mistake again. Do you want to try again? Oh,
okay.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
So can you give us a guide to how people can go about making a case for a claim against the party and a subject access request, and also this idea of some of these firms being just looking to manipulate a situation and not doing it in the right way, and how could an action be made, and which firm should be chosen?
Yeah,
what should we look for?
I would agree with Pam and that probably some of these firms are maybe not the best option at this point. I mean, one concern I'd have is that the situation with Labour is quite complicated because of the fact that it's a private organisation, but also an unincorporated association. So it doesn't have a legal personality. It doesn't exist as a legal entity. In taking any claims against Labour, you're going to have to do it. The way in which you take a claim is going to be dependent on the cause of action. So, for instance, if taking a claim in relation to data was a tortious claim, then actually members would not be able to do that, because it's not possible for a member of the party to take a tortious claim against all the other members of the party. So, you know, and the common law's been pretty clear on that over the years. Now, you can take a claim in relation to a contract dispute, and that's a different issue. Then it would come down to the issue of whether or not the compensation claim that would be made under the Data Protection Act 2018 would be a tortious claim, or would be, you know, a statutory claim instead. Now, there's a case called Gore Vidal and Google, which was back in 2015-16, when the Court of Appeal was looking at the issue of whether or not a claim under Section 13 of the 1998 Data Protection Act was a tortious claim, or was a claim in some other form, and they did decide that in relation to.
Sorry, could you explain what a tortious claim is?
Oh, I mean, it's a type of legal claim, basically. If you think of something like a negligence case, say you take a negligence case against somebody in a car accident, that's a tort. A tort just basically is a legal wrong that's been done to you, for which you can try to claim, you know, compensation, basically. So, and things will be broken up into potential tortious claims as against something like a contract claim, which is a different legal ground. Right. Now, as I say, the problem that you have is that because the Labour Party doesn't exist as a legal entity itself, it's just all of its members. But if you, as a member, sue in tort, you're actually suing yourself, because you are jointly and severally liable with all the other members for any tortious claim that's made against the membership of the Labour Party. And legally, you cannot sue yourself in tort, and that's why there's a problem with this. Now, there are exceptions to this.
If you've left the party, then you can't be.
Yes,
doing
that would be a different situation.
The people
so those
who've left
members who left
make a claim, because they aren't going against themselves, are they?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the other thing to remember here as well is that since January, the GDPR doesn't apply directly in the UK anymore, because that was one of the consequences of Brexit, was that we actually left the GDPR. What we have instead was there was a regulation 2016-679 of the European Parliament, which was passed to create what's called the UK GDPR, and then that was put into domestic legislation through the Data Protection, Privacy and Electronic Communications Amendments, EU Exit Regulations 2019, Statutory Instrument 2019/419, if you want to look it up. Point being that the GDPR EU version doesn't actually apply in the UK anymore. So there are some very small variances at the moment between the UK GDPR and the EU GDPR, which you have to take account of. But basically, it's the same at the moment. And we're in a position where the European Union have agreed to what's called an adequacy recognition in relation to our data protection. But that's actually on a time limit as well. So that may or may not be renewed later on, but that's kind of the broader picture on that. Sorry, that's quite complicated, but
well, it is complicated. But who do you recommend people speak to get this into layman's terms for them?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you put it into layman's terms. I mean, this is the problem, is it is quite complicated, because you've got, you know, you've got to take account of the fact that now we've moved from the EU GDPR to the what's called UK GDPR, and even ICO themselves don't give particularly good explanations of this. So,
okay, well, what about how do you recognise a firm that isn't sort of a crooked kind of law firm to go with, and a firm that's got integrity that would take on a case? How would you go about looking for that type of firm?
Well, I'd be a bit wary of any firm that's offering kind of no win, no fee and particularly if they're talking about group actions, because as Pam pointed out, there's no such thing as a class action in the UK. So it has to be done. I mean, all you can have is a group litigation order, which is basically where you have a number of people who all have exactly the same legal interest in a case. The courts can put that into a group litigation order, but essentially that's more to do with the case management than it is, combining the liability. So,
Right.
We don't really have that opportunity. And the other thing is, if they start talking to you about thousands of pounds worth of claim in this as well, that's pretty unlikely too, and I'd be skeptical of that. It's unlikely that a data breach of this sort is going to be worth thousands and thousands of pounds to an individual, unless you could show that you'd suffered some sort of specific loss that required that level of compensation. So let's say, your bank account details were leaked, and as a consequence of that, criminals got hold of your bank account details, used them in order to make purchases, and basically ran up thousands of pounds worth of debt in your name. That would be a legitimate claim, what's called a pecuniary claim that you could make in relation to that.
Right.
In relation to non-pecuniary claims, you can claim for distress, and this is one of the differences between Section 13 of the 98 Act and the newer GDPR, which did include distress. Long discussion around Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights and the about that, but we won't go into that one.
That's quite a long sounding.
Yeah, I mean, sorry about it. It is actually, it's a pretty complex area of law, and
right.
I think what you need, and if you add on top of that you've got a particular complexity in relation to the nature of the Labour Party as an unincorporated association, which is also quite a niche area of law and quite complicated. You need to, if you're going to find a lawyer, you need to find a lawyer who actually understands all of those principles. And if they don't really even know what an unincorporated association is and how legally that affects the situation, then I wouldn't think they'd be very good at making a claim. I mean, they're going to make a claim in the wrong way. I mean, if somebody issues, like for instance, you issue a claim in tort against the party in relation to this, and you find it just gets struck out because a member can't take a tortious claim against against all the other members. So it's that sort of thing. And so my experience of it is that the party themselves don't understand how unincorporated associations work legally, and very few people do actually understand it. So,
well, look, before I move on to anyone else, happy birthday! And you've had a few, you've had a few happy birthdays on here, and I hope you have a good day. And thank you for coming on your birthday. Now, I'm going to, oh God, so many people to bring in, it's crazy. I'm going to bring in the people with their hands up. I'll start off with Norman, because I was going to bring Norman on when Graham was on, because Norman, you've been expelled on the same day as Graham, is that right?
Yeah, exactly the same time, 2 minutes past 5 on Friday afternoon. So I think that's taking solidarity a bit far, but I'm all in favor of it. Yeah, no, I think there was some sort of, we're in the same CLP, so there are probably a few other people have been expelled at the same time as well. I mean, the stuff about the data breach, though, is, I mean, when I was first suspended, an hour after I was suspended, a very hostile member of our CLP rang me up and said, "Oh, I've heard you've been suspended." And so this was, total breach of any idea, nonsense of confidentiality, and other people have got worse experiences to relate than me. But it shows you how the Labour Party have been played fast and loose with people's data all the time. And what I do feel a bit of a caution, though, about us getting too wrapped up in the legal stuff. I'm all in favor of using every tactic we can to try to stop the bureaucracy in its tracks and to unseat the kind of people who are now in charge of things. I'm all for it. But it does take me back to when I was involved in a big piece of community action to try to stop a huge development in our area. And one of the people there periodically would get up, because we were thinking of any way we could stop this development, and somebody would get up and say, same guy who'd been looking at documents and getting legal information, and he'd get up and he'd say, "We've got them now," because he'd come across some marvelous scheme to stop this development in its tracks, but it never worked. And what I think is we have to go back to what Graham was said, which was the big thing, which underlies all this stuff that we're talking about, is how can we use our numbers to stop what's going on? Because the reason that for all this data, these shenanigans, I think Greg made this clear, is that a small minority of people are trying to dominate a party, or have tried to dominate a party, with lots of people who don't really go along with what they want. So they've used technology to try to fix things, to break rules, to use any kind of information they can against them, to expel them, to suspend them, to do whatever they can. And they've used computers to do it. And that's really what this comes down to. We boil it all down, leave all the legal stuff outside. That's what they've tried to do. So what we've got to do is use our numbers, our numericals. They are still few and we are still many, and use that to stop them in their tracks. And we can do it. But I'm not, and let's bombard them with letters and do whatever we can with them. But let's also use our numbers to take direct action. We know where Starmer's got his office. We can go there, but we've got to take our message to the outside world, because all this stuff that goes on, people outside don't know anything about it. The media won't cover it. The media should be obviously covering all this. It's all part of the corruption and sleaze at the heart of British politics. We can't criticize Johnson and the Labour Party because the people at the top of the Labour Party are probably just as corrupt as he is, but they're just turning their corruption on their own party. So we have got to, the people who are on the left and who actually believe in democracy in the party, have got to take up arms now, before it's too late. Graham is quite right. There's very little time left because people are going off disillusioned, off to other places. We've got to get the left has got to get together. The people who believe in democracy in the Labour Party have got together, and we've got to do something now. But I'll leave you on that note, Crispin. Thanks very much.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry about your expulsion, and also that you were sort of under Graham's shadow in a way, because he got out first by a few minutes. He put the press release out before you did.
Yes, sneaky, I'd say, very sneaky.
Norman wrote the press release.
Oh, it's Christine's fault.
Oh, right,
it's true, actually.
That's very modest of you, Norman.
I'm very self-sacrificing. That's me.
Right, Jackie Walker's on the call. I've not spoken to Jackie Walker before, just so anyone who's watching from the compliance unit.
Yeah, just say I'm not here. It's not really me. I'm not here. Can I just say that this issue about breaching data has been going on for a very long time. And it started during my first suspension, which was 2017. And with me, it's actually provable, because in both my cases, while the hearing was going on, there were journalists from The Guardian and from the Jewish Chronicle reporting on what was being said. Now, this is easily provable. I have to say, I've had one of these notifications as well. And for somebody who has had death threats and worse, I mean, this is really, really disturbing that somebody has got hold of my personal information. But what I also want to say absolutely is that we have to find a way. I'm sorry, Pamela, to disagree, but going to the ICO is a total waste of time, a total waste of time. When I've gone to them, and I've gone to them repeatedly, they have either told me that they've got so many complaints from the Labour Party that they can't deal with it, or they haven't answered, and you never get anything from them. And what I would like to know is, if the ICO aren't working properly, who can we go to in complaint against them as well? Because that's what we need to do, because the ICO are not going to take any action against the Labour Party, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I got booted off just when he started, but I did hear the end. Yeah, I've heard that the ICO is pretty toothless and doesn't really do much, especially when you think that the legal establishment is probably more in favour of Keir Starmer than people like us. So Yeah, I mean, it's not, and it doesn't seem to have done anything in the past. So there's no evidence that it would not be just a waste of time really to go through there. Thank you, Jackie. Now, lots of people have put their hands up, and I'm going to keep going. We're going to keep going because I want to kind of get some resolution. Lots of people are asking questions about where they can find a template for a subject access request. So if anyone has that information, if they could put that in the chat or put their hand up, if anyone can speak about that in the chat on the call, that would be good. Bill Averill contacted me to ask to speak. I was wondering if Bill, are you there?
I am, Crispin.
Now you sent me quite a good piece of information, and can you tell us more about that? Has it been covered yet? Not particularly.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it brief, Crispin, because a lot of what I was going to say has been covered, particularly by Greg, but to a certain extent Pamela as well. Basically, we obviously don't know the details of this latest data breach, but the one that affected Blackboard last year, they actually waited. You're supposed to report data breaches within 72 hours. They actually waited 8 weeks to report it to the Labour Party. And obviously, if you're putting people's data at risk, the longer you leave it, the worse potentially that risk is going to be. And as Greg said, initially they said that no bank details, etc., credit card details were compromised. They then came back afterwards and said no, they'd made a mistake. They'd made a mistake there. So we need to know who has been processing the data, when the data breach occurred, what they were using the data for, etc. Now, it's obviously a complicated subject, and we're not going to get it resolved this morning. I did see the various emails, the various messages from James Hall this morning. I don't know James, but I'm interested to join the Facebook group that is promoted there, because I think it is important that we coordinate what we're going to do as far as we can. Now, in terms of, I understand people talking about legal action to gain compensation, etc. I'm more interested in the accountability issue here. And, you know, we've had two major data breaches in 2 years. Now, if you've had the first one, then surely action should have been taken to prevent the situation occurring again. I think that because if you look at the information policy, David Evans' name is all over it on behalf of the Labour Party. That's where I think that the accountability should rest, and I would be looking not just at court action, but presumably some sort of vote of no confidence in David Evans. But I think that we have to wait until the details on this latest data breach become apparent. But
well, if
where we're going at the moment.
I mean, if the third party is his partner's company, surely he has no alternative but to stand down, doesn't he?
Well, I've sent you stuff previously about his company, or now officially his wife's company, the communications company, the campaign company, and I think that there are other issues there in terms of there's apart from the work that Steve has been doing in Squawk Box, there's other excellent independent media. I would particularly talk about an organisation called Inside Croydon, who've produced a lot of stuff about David Evans, and I think that it would be worth actually discussing as a separate issue the campaign company and their relationship with the Labour Party. But but yes, I think that I wouldn't have thought that they would be involved in this particular data breach, because as Greg had mentioned before, and as I'd written to you, with Blackboard, it was all about fundraising, which is, I imagine, why they've been releasing our data. But it does raise questions about why we're using third parties and at the same time getting rid of a quarter of the Labour Party staff.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, look, I'm going to move on because I've got about 10 people who haven't spoken yet. Thank you, Bill. We're going to carry on till people have spoken. Everyone, don't worry, you'll get a chance to speak. Sabine, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, great. Because, yeah.
Do you want to add anything to what's been said?
Yeah, I sort of just like to add, for me personally, it sort of was the shock of this data breach. I sent off an email straight away saying, what is it concerning? Who are the third parties? Because the email we got was so confusing. Several third parties here and everywhere. Couldn't keep up with them. But I haven't heard anything yet. But for me, it's the issue about accountability and being transparent with members and being honest with members. And remembering that I worked for a local authority where we applied GDPR, if I had anything done like not switching off my computer when going for a toilet break, I would have been in deep trouble. Never mind what sort of happened there. And the other thing which I found rather dodgy was earlier this year, in the run-up to elections, we were sort of contacted, or the idea was, what would you do for a campaign to get people to sign up for early votes, speak postal votes? And that seemed to be the whole campaign somebody wanted to set up. I had a concern about harvesting people's data, because local authority up and down the country were actually sending out registration letters plus postal vote application forms. So I could not understand why the Labour Party would want to see that as the prime campaign in the run up to the elections. I mean, there were no policies around.
Yeah.
And I felt quite concerned about the potential for harvesting people's data.
Yeah.
That was that.
Well, that's another interesting point. And you fired off this email straight away as soon as you got the other one. And there's people who've been writing in the chat about what to write in the email. Thank you, Sabine. Now we've got Win-Tad. Win-Tad, are you there?
Yes. Hello. Hi, everyone. I think that there are a couple of things really, and I bow to all of the legal experts on here, which I'm not. But I have done some work on certainly GDPR in relation to European research. And of course, your data which expresses your political views or opinion is sensitive data, more so than just ordinary personal ID. And that actually, I believe, puts additional requirements onto the data controller, in which case this is the Labour Party. Now, lots of organisations outsource certain processing to third parties, but I believe that they have a legal obligation to tell us who that third party is and what data processes they were involved in. I mean, I'm an ex-member. I held on as long as I could until February, March this year. And I just felt that I wasn't free to express an opinion in the Labour Party any longer. And I'm 75 and I've been apart from a blip in the Blair years, a member since I was 16. So for me personally, it was very sad to have to leave. But I did feel that I could no longer support the Labour Party as it is today. I have written to them. I've submitted a subject access request. I doubt very much. I mean, they take organisations. It's a huge workload, and that's good. And that's why everybody should do that. You won't get them back within the 30 days, I don't think. But I have asked for specifically, not only for all of the data held about me, but what they've done with my data. I want to know who that third party is, what processing they were used for. And I also want to know what considerations the Labour Party gave in terms of keeping my data secure, because that is where they have a responsibility to do that. And I would agree. I think it's very tempting to say, yeah, let's sue them. But I think we need to operate as a group of individuals who, I believe most of us are either ex-members or, I mean, even my son was expelled simply for shooting off or putting on Twitter's support for Chris Williamson, and he was expelled immediately. But I think it would be important to try and find out how many actual members had received the email, as well as ex-members or expelled members, because I want to know why they're hanging on to my data, because one of the principles of data protection law is limitation. And if they have no purpose for holding onto my data, then they should have deleted it, whether or not I requested them to.
Right. Well, thank you for coming on. Very good point about how important it is, that particular data. It's not just any old data. A political attachment is a different realm totally. Sandra Wyman, are you there? Sandra Wyman. I'm in fear of my my Wi-Fi going. Yeah. Sandra, are you there?
Yeah, no, I've unmuted. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Oh, good, right. A lot of what I was going to say has been said. What we've done locally as an initial, just almost a knee-jerk thing, was to send off letters. Somebody provided a template asking for precise detail about information that has been shared or has been risked about us personally. So that was the first thing. I think I think there obviously here there are further steps we can take. Personal concerns. I was the subject of a complaint, a malicious complaint made last year about this time, which took about 6 months to sort out. At which time they discovered I had broken a rule, but sent me 3 pages of how I could avoid breaking that rule again that I hadn't broken, which was a bit insulting. But during that, I supplied a lot of personal information in defense of what I've been accused of. And that now has been risked. So that's a person who I'm concerned about. That I'm concerned about all the other things. But the main thing I'm concerned about is that we now have in the Labour Party an atmosphere of suspicion. I went to the last conference and there was sort of the sense that we were all, everybody on the left was at risk at every point. That we might actually arrive in Brighton and discover we were no longer being accepted as delegates. We'd find out we'd been chucked out or barred or whatever. It's happened to a lot of people. Even what might have been well-meaning advice from our regional officers on the idea that they might help us with our speeches if we told them what we were going to speak about, raised suspicions. So we didn't do that. And it's that sense that we are under surveillance the whole time by people who want to get rid of us that worries me. And this data breach is actually quite an important part of that. You know, simply because of the nature of the sort of data they are now collecting about social media activities. I mean, the complaint against me was made from something I said on an encrypted WhatsApp page that could only be shared by means of a photo capture, for example, but that was allowable. It's the sort of argument they're using to avoid the Ford report being made public. But in terms of their own procedures, they'll use it, and that's dishonest, and that is wrong. And it's this dishonesty, almost criminal dishonesty, that's happening in the Labour Party at the moment, which really, really frightens me. I think that's all I want to say. There's a lot else. I mean, their computer stuff is absolutely useless. If you actually want tech advice on disability, you know, sort of applications that you can use, you don't get it. But I don't think this is incompetence. I think there is a deliberateness in this. That's all.
Now, Katerina, do you want to speak?
Yes. Hi, everyone.
Hiya.
Regarding my letter, I am tomorrow I will be contacting Unite Legal Department and see as a union member where I stand and what they can do for me.
Right.
I know it's not very, you know, I understand do it as a group, and I understand there is need for solidarity. But I don't have the funds for a private lawyer, and well, Unite are my lawyers, so I would expect them to do something as a union for their union members in this kind of. And if anyone else is in a union, they have the right to contact their legal department and see what they can do. And of course, I will do something about my bank account very, very quickly. But that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you, Katerina. I like the way you walk around with your camera. I think everyone should do it. I think everyone should do it. But some people have a heavy laptop, I guess, and they can't do it. But thank you. And Charlotte.
Yes, please. While it's a very serious abuse to have our data all over the place, I think we've all made very clear that we're fully aware that a lot of the data that will have been spread about, assuming any has, will have been gleanings from the internet. It will have been a serious continuation of what's been happening for the last few years, which started with people like Jackie Walker and Chris Williamson and moves on through large numbers of people that we know of who have been deliberately assaulted under the European Convention on Human Rights for many years now. And yet the majority of the Labour membership are still either blissfully unaware or as Naomi has just pointed out, feel terrified. Now, these are old adults and should be standing together. And this psychological harm that has been deliberately done to the entire socialist membership, certainly, but also far more to the hundreds who've been weeded out of the party. They've had their reputations utterly trashed deliberately by the party. This is all against their human rights. And for the majority of this time, we were actually in the EU. And therefore, what Labour's done has been quite deliberate terror on the Labour Party itself. And what concerns me is that there isn't a public standing up against it. There is all of us, and we're doing our best, but enormous numbers of Labour members who wouldn't agree with what's happened if they knew about it seem to be silent. They're keeping their heads down. They're doing nothing which might help themselves. It's this thing about they came for somebody in the next town and it wasn't me, so I kept my head down. It's something which I find really frightening amongst so many socialists, that they're prepared to do that. I think we need to start getting back to some form of mass meeting, because it was the mass meetings that brought the socialists up in 2015, 16, 17. It is the mass meetings that give everybody the strong support to be able to withstand what's happening here. And really, as this has happened through what has been essentially an isolation anyway of everybody because of the COVID mess that the government's made, this is even more isolated people who have been psychologically assaulted. We've heard weeks on end about how bad people feel about this in their own lives. And yet they're still not getting support. And I believe that the admission currently of any socialist members into any parts of the committees of this party is only so that they can be used next as an example to all the other members to keep your mouth shut. That's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Good to see you again. And Jennifer in Sheffield, good to see you.
Good morning. Thanks very much, Crispin, for continuing the meeting and allowing people to speak on this important issue. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
No problem. Okay, so a couple of years ago, I chaired a meeting that somebody spoke at, I co-chaired a meeting that somebody spoke at, and the meeting ended up in the press. Now, who that meeting was, to be honest, it's irrelevant, but as a result of that meeting, an open public letter was posted on the internet with my name and I think 4 other members of my CLP's names. That letter was sent to Tom Watson and was circulated by some right-wing Twitter accounts and things like that as well. Now, this accusation of this letter was that we'd done things that would breach party rules, that were involving hate speech, that sort of thing, and that would, you know, the aim of the letter was to get us kicked out of the party, basically. And of course, it was all nonsense. However, the issue for that, and which is the same issue for this, and I also have received the email, by the way, the issue is, I go to my CLP and sign into my CLP under a name that is not my legal name, okay? I use a name on Facebook, on Twitter, on these meetings, on anything else that is not my legal name. And the reason for that is because I've been a victim of domestic abuse, domestic violence. And there are 3 separate orders against my ex-partner who was arrested, charged and convicted of 18 separate counts of abuse involving manipulation of my personal data using my name, my email address, my Facebook page, etc., like a lot of abusers do. So I have to be very careful about what I do with my identity and who has access to my legal name. Now, this letter that was posted and sent to Tom Watson, etc., had my real legal name on. It said that I was in Healy CLP. That gave my abuser access to what my whereabouts would be. So as a result of that, I have to make a lot of organization about when we did used to physically attend meetings, make sure I'm going with someone, make sure there's somebody to accompany me home, etc., and as well as arrangements for babysitting my child, who could potentially also be at risk. So this email, firstly, the fact that we were told in the email it's private and confidential is appalling, absolutely appalling, because this is something that's happened to us as individual members. We have a right, a legal right, and we know this from a past judgment involving the party, don't we? We know that we have a legal right to talk about something that has actually affected us personally. We can't be stopped from talking about something that's affected us personally. We are allowed to talk about those things. So the fact that we were essentially told within the email to not discuss it alarmed me. But the fact that our data has been breached to who and is being used where and how was also a trigger, and has been dreadfully upsetting. And I know I'm not the only person in this situation. So when we're talking about fighting it and different ways of fighting it, that's really important. But we also need to be looking at, if you have people within your CLPs who you know have been victims of domestic abuse and domestic violence, who have received this email, ask you now, comrades, please do reach out to them and check that they're okay. Because nobody in my CLPs reached out to me, and they know what I went through with the past data breach. When I asked for that past data breach to be investigated, the response from the CLP secretary and the then chair, we have a different chair now, was, oh, but you have attended meetings, you have put things on when we've done rallies and stuff, you have spoke under your own name. No, I haven't. No, I haven't. That's never happened. My real legal name has never been put on a public thing alongside being a Labour Party member or a member of anything else publicly. Okay. So there was no support then. There needs to be support now. There absolutely needs to be support now. And of course, this goes for men and women. It goes for anybody who's been a victim of domestic abuse. But if you know someone is in a situation like mine, please reach out to them and check that they're okay. Because, you know, currently, Crispin, I can't even get it together enough to write that email to the party to say, who's got my information? Who's got it? Because it's so upsetting and so triggering and taking me back to that place that I fought for 8 years to be out of that headspace. It sent me right back in there. And when someone talked about the effect of distress on members earlier, they're absolutely right. There are a lot of people in a lot of distress, whether they're current members or past members. So the party needs to be supporting us. The CLP executive needs to be supporting their members. Branch executive needs to support their members. And if you know people who are past members who've received this email, check that they're okay, please. Because it's affecting people's mental health. It's affecting mine. I'm not sleeping at the minute. Look at the state of me. So that's it. Just please put your arms around each other.
Well, sorry to hear that, Jennifer, and we're solidarity to you always, and we're all with you, and keep you, you know, we're all with you, Jennifer. If you look on the messages, we're all wishing you well, and I'm sorry this has happened. Yeah, I didn't really think of that perspective on it as well. It's something I hadn't thought of, because I'm not a victim of domestic abuse. So, James.
Hello, can you hear me?
Are you there, James?
Hello?
I can, yeah.
Yep.
Hi, yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, right. We've had Evans mentioned, but we must remember that he's on record as having said that he does not want the Labour Party to be a membership party. He wants it to be a party controlled by a small group of the leadership and the apparatchiks, which simply has supporters who have absolutely no say in how it's run or its policies. So let's not forget that one. While I have the opportunity, all sympathy to Graham. My only surprise about his expulsion is that it hasn't come a great deal earlier, but he, like so many other people, is a great loss to the party. Now, I have seen an awful lot of people who are honestly quite bewildered about this data breach and what they should do about it. So I would urge people not to rush into precipitate action until they have had a chance to get some advice, and we will be trying to publish that on the Facebook group that I have been promoting. For instance, when you join the Labour Party, they give you a statement of their data retention policy, and amongst other things that says if you are expelled, they have a right to keep your data forever. Now, that and other ground, the grounds for this may well be dubious and open to appeal. For instance, one of the reasons they say that is for the public protection in future. Now, I don't see that, for instance, having expelled someone because they support Palestinian rights is an issue of protecting the public. Similarly, they say they will keep your data for some period in case on your death you wish to make them a bequest. I don't seriously think that they can see people they've thrown out wanting to leave them a bequest. So there's a lot there which is dubious and may, on advice, be subject to a certain amount of challenge. I would like to pick up on Katerina's point, and that is that many of us are union members, and I have certainly, as a member of Unite, asked the advice of the legal department. And I think if there are enough of us in each of the various unions asking for that advice, we may possibly be able to prompt the unions into doing something for us. I very much take the advice we're given of not to go with some rather dubious no-win, no-fee lawyers on this, but let's be realistic, the majority of us cannot pay vast lawyers' fees to take action ourselves, so it may be that we have no resort but to some rather dubious lawyers, however dubious that is. Again, a sign of bewilderment, a lot of people have been saying, I've sent in an SAR and they've asked me for a photo. Well, again, if you refer to the ICO website, they will tell you to expect that if you make a subject access request, you will be asked to prove your identity, and that's quite reasonable. Otherwise, there could be some very serious data breaches there. I could pretend to be you asking to know what they hold on you. It's plainly ridiculous, as they don't have a photo in the first place to use that as ID. So it's actually simply a delaying tactic. But to wonder why it's happening is wasting one's energy. That's just the technique. And when I've put an SAR in the past, I've had that in requests for other forms of identification or proof of identification. As I say, it's a delaying tactic, but you have to go along with it. Not least because if they ask for something like that, the time limit that they have for replying doesn't start until they have received that information. So if you don't give them what they ask for, however ridiculous it is, you are simply letting them off the hook for some period. And if you never send them that stuff, then they have no obligation in effect to answer.
So can I just ask you your opinion on something? What if say 100,000 members ask for subject access requests separately? Would that, I mean, we're talking about bankrupting the party, but that would cripple the resources. Surely they wouldn't have any way to deal with all these suspensions and expulsions, would they, if they had that many subject access requests to deal with?
It may be that flooding them with subject access requests, and especially given the toothlessness of the ICO, it may well be that flood is the best we can achieve. But at least it will divert their attentions and their resources from a great deal of much more malicious things that they're doing. I'd like to finish up, please, if I may, by saying that throughout my life, or my politically active life, which is rather more than 50 years now, I never cease to be dismayed by the left's willingness to rush into factionalism. And to pull in all sorts of different directions. And we've certainly seen that over the last few years, and particularly since Jeremy Corbyn was suspended. The number of would-be new replacements for the Labour Party, the number of groups, they just multiply and multiply and multiply. Well, here we have one thing where perhaps we actually can all pull together. I would urge people to think a little, find out what they're doing, think about exactly what should go in an SAR and to what end before just rushing off and doing something. I should also point out that if you put in too many SARs, they can then be disregarded on the grounds of being vexatious or unreasonable. So there's a limited number of bites at this cherry. But we do have something here where we can act in concert, where we can have some solidarity. Let's not waste the opportunity. Let's think about it. Let's get good advice. Let's share that advice and then do something.